Hey everyone, on our latest Trade to Black podcast, we once again connect with the Executive Chairman of Curaleaf, Boris Jordan, in the streets of Chicago last week at the latest Benzinga conference. And in this conversation, we touch on a number of important things, including, does he believe safe banking will still pass from our previous conversation in the summer? As well, how fast is the German market progressing? And finally, if we don't see regulatory framework change in this year's midterm elections, could we still see a company like Curaleaf uplisted on the big board exchanges? Could it happen? You're going to want to hear what he has to say in our latest Trade to Black podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to the Trade to Black podcast. I'm your host, Shad Dales, and look who we have in downtown Chicago, the Executive Chairman and founder of Curaleaf. Big old smile on his face, Mr. Boris Jordan. Boris, good to see you. How are you?
Good to be here. Love it.
How you
Love
like
the forum?
How you liking Chicago? Yeah, you like this setup?
I do. Listen, I don't get to Chicago very often, but it's a beautiful town. I got in on a pouring rain, and now the sun's come out, so everyone's happy.
Check out that Bears game last week. I was like,
with the guys cleaning the water. Did you see that off the field?
Good way to kick off a football season, right?
Yep. And we've got a shop right near there, so on Weed Street, we got a lot of customers coming in to see us before the game. So
How big is this market for you?
This is one of our top 5.
Yeah.
And I think probably number 3 out of the top 5. So it's our number 3 market.
Yeah. We had you on, 6 weeks ago, early August. Here we are now in Chicago. You made some comments, talk about safe banking. We're heading into midterms, a little bit closer. You basically said a lot of the contacts and lobbyists that you were speaking to that you feel strongly that it will pass. Update on how you think things are progressing. Is it still like the same sentiment? Like, how are you feeling about all that?
So, there's a recess up until this week.
Yeah.
So they're all back now.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, my whole team is in Washington, D.C. as we speak. We're getting fresh feedback every hour. So they're meeting this week with today and tomorrow with staffers from Booker's office and with Schumer's office. So we should have some more progress. But I want to repeat what I said earlier. I think we're the closest we've ever been to getting safe pass. Safe plus hope is what I think it's going to be. And right now, it's literally the next 2 months are absolutely critical. We're asking everybody to send checks to the USCC, which is our lobby organizations. We're asking investors. We're asking companies. We just had a big meeting with all the CEOs of the MSOs here at the conference. Everybody's pledged to help out, which is not big. We need $25,000, $50,000 checks to try to get this thing over the line. We're running a campaign which is targeting close people to all the senators that we need. So their staff, people around them, advocates that's work with them. So it's a micro strategy to really get pressure on these senators to get this thing through over the line.
Who are some of the notable names that you sat with here today? Just to I mean,
everybody, all the top, I don't know if they want me to reveal that information, but all the top CEOs were there today and their lobbyists. So,
and the feedback was what?
Everybody wants this thing to happen.
Yeah,
so if even 2 years ago people kind of said, oh, this isn't important, I think everybody now realizes how important this is, not only for the existing companies, but even more so, I would say, for social justice applicants and social justice license winners.
Yeah.
Because they can't finance their businesses without this.
What do you think about Safe Plus that was introduced since the last time that we spoke to you, which targets a lot of the expungement, social reform? Great initiative. Do you think it happens, or is it too little too late right now?
So I think we're going to get aspects of it. So what I heard today from the lobbyists that came in to brief all of us at this meeting is that they think that it's safe plus hope. So certain elements of the HOPE Act are probably going to be okay to pass. But really, that's what we need. We need Schumer and Booker to stop negotiating, give us a law that we can then take across the aisle to the other side and start talking to the Republicans about seeing how many of them we got. And we can't do that until we have a final version, or at least a very close to final version of the law, because then we can go over to them and say, okay, what problems do you have? Because at the moment, we have 80 votes in the Senate for safe, purely safe.
Okay.
The minute you start applying any other aspects to it, whether it be social expungement, social justice, small loans, veterans, you start losing people.
Right.
And potentially on both sides. So we need 60 votes to get it across. So we need a rough draft or a very close to final draft of the law so we can start talking and finding out how many people we got.
So when you look, if I'm an investor, it's like, well, here we go. We're hearing this over and over again, or politicians and lobbyists telling what you want to hear as we head into election. What makes you believe it's different this time than, say, years in the past?
So I think, listen, I think the Democrats have made a mess of this thing. They had every opportunity to get something. This thing polls extremely high. One of the other cannabis lobbies ran an interesting poll. I believe the results are going to be printed tonight. But one of the things I've heard about it is it polled Republicans.
Yeah.
And 70% of Republicans said that they're pro expungements, they're pro cannabis legalization and banking. And what's interesting is 47% of the people polled Republicans said they smoked cannabis, and 7 said that they didn't want to answer. So we feel those that didn't want to answer probably do. So over 50% of the Republicans use cannabis.
Right.
So this is one of the most bipartisan issues in this country, and I don't understand why it hasn't been passed yet.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are asked that question too. A lot of the focus, especially the feedback that we received from our last interview, is, we talk about Germany, but also just the focus on getting onto major exchanges. What do you think it's going to have to take to get listed on a major exchange within, I don't want to give timelines, but just making it happen?
So the major exchanges in the U.S. have been very clear to all of us that they want language in SAFE that not only gives safe harbor, but says that the U.S. companies can list on these exchanges. They literally want that to say.
Yeah.
We don't believe this particular Safe Banking Act is going to say that. But what we have heard is that in the conversations we had with TSX, that the TSX is much more open to.
They are.
Yes, because the TSX actually has gone through this process. We worked very closely with them. I can't give the results, but I can say they were very, very positive. Their board looked at it. Everybody looked at it. But once they went to their constituencies, like their auditors, their bankers, their custodians, they turn around and say, guys, but we have nothing to hang this on. We can't do it. Because we have interests in the U.S.
Right.
And those interests are going to be hurt by doing something that's federally legal. So if we get safe banking, and we get in that safe banking, we get a language, and I know we do have that in there, of giving relief specifically in the area of safe harbor to investors, and financial institutions. They can do it.
Can you maybe, and just for viewers that are watching this that are now learning the space more and more, but identify what safe harbor means?
Safe harbor means it's specific to, we're not going to get safe harbor for everyone in this law, but we will get it for banks and financial institutions, which means they can service and work with us without any consequences at a federal level. So it allows them to operate. It's like an indemnity from the federal government. So that's what this is. And what's interesting about the TSX is people might say, okay, but that doesn't give us U.S. But what that does allow is with safe harbor language, almost every investor in the world can actually invest in the sector. And with that, if we're on the TSX, that's an exchange that particularly Canadian pension funds, but as well as the U.S., can work with. It's a major exchange.
Gives you access to institutions, right?
Whereas the CSE just doesn't give us that. That's the problem.
What do you think has changed with the TSX? Just the growth of the industry?
I think that a combination. I think firstly, they want to grow as an exchange.
Of course.
There's not a huge amount of new companies coming on in Canada. And these exchanges, the cannabis sector in Canada is a big sector.
Yeah.
They would love to get the fees associated and the business associated with having these companies trade on the TSX. And lastly, I think that the most important thing is that they will have cover with this, because the Canadian exchange has some lower thresholds than some of the U.S. exchanges, and from their perspective, if their supplier companies that, as I said, do their banking, do their payments, do their custody, say, okay, we now have cover as financial institutions with the safe harbor language, they're going to want us on the exchanges.
100%. So do you think, is this wishful thinking, but with the economy at a stalemate right now, there's one thing that could move, and it's cannabis. If you were to move some sort of regulatory framework, do you think that adds to incentives for them to push this across the line a little bit quicker than what's been happening in the past?
So I think there's two things. The first is I think one of the things that slowed down at a state level some of these approvals and programs was the fact that the Biden administration gave out that $1.3 trillion last June. They covered all the deficits in the liberal states like New York, Illinois, and places like that, and that's why the programs have kind of stalled in New York and places like that. The reason the Illinois program got off the ground is they got that program off the ground 6 months before they got the money from the federal government to fill in the problem on their budget deficit. So that's why the Illinois program got going. But the other states, what drove cannabis? Tax revenue.
Right.
So people needed the tax revenue. During the pandemic, things were really bad.
Yep.
Everybody wanted to get more tax revenue, so they pushed the industry. Now that a lot of these states got money from the federal government, they weren't as desperate to push cannabis, and there's still pushback from certain organizations on cannabis. It's a work in progress.
Yeah.
So I personally am pretty bulled up right now that, one, that money that was given out is coming to an end. These states need revenue. So I think at a state level, we're about to get some heavy activity over the next year or so. But at the federal level, it's not really a tax issue at the moment. It's at the federal level, it's about the FDA, it's about safety, it's about the pharma lobby, which, let's be honest, the pharma lobby sees what's happening. Alcohol sales are down and opiate sales are down in every state where cannabis has been legalized.
Yes. And
the pharma businesses will not get involved in this sector until they have synthetic cannabis. They don't want to work with biologicals.
Right.
And so until someone comes away with inventing.
You've had those conversations.
We talk to everybody all the time. We know the pharma has not been pro-cannabis. They have been very aggressively anti-cannabis. I wouldn't say they're anti-cannabis aggressively anymore, but they're definitely not pro-cannabis at the moment. They're waiting to see somebody comes up with a synthetic form of cannabis, the way they can stabilize their drugs and make sure they're equal, they're the same every time. You're going to get them on board, and once they come on board, it's all over, right? Because they're the most powerful lobby in Washington.
What's the vibe been like the last couple of days? From what I've seen, a lot of consolidation conversation that's been taking place. But if you are like investors that are out there listening right now, what would you describe the last couple of days being here as like?
So I don't think there's going to be any major big deals coming down the road, because most of the big MSOs have maxed out in most of the states.
Yeah, of course.
So what it really is just add-ons in those states where we can build a bigger footprint. So places like Arizona and Nevada, where you don't have the same impediments as you do on the East Coast, where they're limiting the amount of licenses you can have. So I think you're going to see a lot of small deals. I think the biggest issue I have is that a lot of the medium-sized cannabis companies have a lot of debt that's coming due, and the refinance rates are going to be exorbitantly high. And my question is, can they sustain it?
Right.
And so I think you're going to see some pressure on the mid-tier and the lower-tier cannabis companies over the next 6 months if we don't get safe in November. And I think it's the top 5 that are going to be the winners in that situation.
Wow. So big changes potentially could happen.
I think there's going to be some big changes. But again, it's going to be complicated because the states, a lot of the big MSOs are maxed out. So we're going to have to go to these states and say, okay, do you want loss of these jobs, or do you want to allow us to actually buy some of these companies that are in trouble? Because right now we can't buy them because we're already at max limit in a lot of these states of what we can own. But as these mid-tier companies get into distress, and I can tell you a lot of them are in a lot of distress now, we're talking to all of them, I can tell you right now that the problem is going to be going to the regulators and say, all right, guys, they can't pay their staff anymore. Do you want these stores to close, or do you want to lift some of these restrictions and allow us to consolidate these assets?
Wow, that's interesting. You talked about maximizing in states. There's an important initiative on the ballot going into the midterms where we could see adult use in 5 states, which is Missouri, Maryland, North and South Dakota, and Arkansas. Are those states that you're preparing for or looking at? Is that something that?
Yeah, I mean, some of those states we'll definitely look at, and we think that they're interesting. But Curaleaf tries to target very highly densely populated states. Given the amount of products we have and the amount of money we invest in infrastructure, we need to be in states where the infrastructure and the investment in those states warrants, the business and the demand will warrant those investments we make. So, and it has to move the needle. We've gotten to a position now where little transactions don't really move the needle for us. So we're looking at places we can go into. That's why I went so heavily into Europe, was because I see Germany and the UK as 2 countries that are really going to move the needle for Curaleaf. Germany
continues to draw attention as to what's developing over there. Can you give us any kind of update on what could we see? Could you see it legalized before the end of the calendar year?
So I don't think so. They've ran into one little hiccup, which is there's actually 2. One solved, one we're working on right now. So there's 2 treaties that Germany is a signatory to. One is the UN treaty That one is pretty simple. Canada had to deal with that as well. What you do is you exit the treaty, you get an exclusion, and you go back in the treaty. It's like a one-day process.
Okay.
So that you can get that done. That's an easy one. The next one is the EU treaty. So they're part of the EU, and the EU has the same language as the UN treaty. The problem is the EU has no one's ever gone through this process in the EU. So I know they're having conversations. There's 5 countries right now in Europe that are having conversation at the level of the EU because they all want adult use programs, and they have to find a way to get this done. Now, let's be honest, Germany is the biggest,
right?
That's the biggest weight in Europe. So if anyone can do it, it's the Germans.
How do you, like, is it moving at a pace that is a lot quicker than, say, like we've talked about this before, where yes, it is moving quicker from, say, a couple of years ago, but to manage expectations timeline wise, like, how do you see like this whole German European market materializing?
So listen, the UK has a great medical program. We don't need to do anything there. We just need to build awareness like we did in the US early on to make sure people know there's a program. But it's a very good law. It's direct to consumer. Mm-hmm. It's really, really good law. The German medical law wasn't great, but we're not really focused on it. We just bought 420, one of the biggest distributors in Germany. We're really focused on adult use. And with adult use, I think realistically speaking, if they can get over this EU issue, which I'm hoping they can by the end of this year, then I think early 24 is very realistic in terms of German adult use.
Last thing I wanted to ask you, social reform has been a hot topic within this industry for, probably about a year now. It's been probably even longer year, but it's really brought to a lot of attention over this past 12 months. The whole Brittany Griner situation that happened in Russia really shed a light on what's currently going on even in our own backyard here in the U.S. as to like how many people are actually spending time in jail and stuff like that. Have you fielded a lot of calls since that kind of incident has happened? Like, has it brought attention to like, your company as to like what you're doing and people wanting to know or find out?
Nobody's really addressed this. I personally, behind the scenes, because I have old relationships in Russia from my time there in the emerging markets, have been inquiring about this thing. Okay. I was hopeful that maybe I could be helpful and get this thing done. But I understand the U.S. government now is involved, right? And from what I understand, that they are negotiating potentially an exchange of people. And so my bet is that she'll be out within 3 to 6 months.
Wow.
That's, if I was, I think that's the good news. Is I think they will. I don't think the Russians. Listen, there's obviously a lot of tension between the U.S. and Russia right now.
Yeah.
Huge amount. So obviously it's not a good time for her to have done what she did. And listen, I am going to put a little bit of criticism on her. Listen, I'm in the cannabis business, and when I used to fly into Russia because I own business there, I wouldn't take cannabis with me because I knew it was illegal in that country, right? Mm-hmm. So you shouldn't do that. But we have the same problem. You were right in the United States, right? It's federally illegal, and anyone could get stopped on the border and go to jail for it. Now we have stopped doing that recently. Yeah. But at the federal level, I know we're still doing it at the state levels, but at the federal level, this administration, the previous administrations have stopped arresting people for cannabis, especially small amounts of cannabis. But in her case, listen, she's in a very politicized environment. Obviously, the Russians are going to use this for their benefit. Yeah. I think the U.S. is prepared to trade because it's embarrassing for them that this is happening. So I do think that she will probably get out.
3 to 6 months, you think?
I think so. Yeah.
Interesting. What's on the agenda for the rest of the week?
Listen, we're out here. First of all, I love getting out to Illinois to visit my my businesses. So I've been around a bunch of stores. I've visited competitor stores. I've visited our own stores. I've been doing some mystery shopping just to see how the service is in different companies, because I like to see what my competition is doing as well as my own company. And I'm going to be here. I'm meeting with staff and our employees. I'm doing a dinner tomorrow night to meet some of the employees in Illinois, so I can get to know them better. Because this is the first time we're really getting out after COVID. Yeah. So we're getting on the road. Matt and I, our new CEO, are visiting with people. We're introducing, Matt as the new CEO to the company. Obviously, they don't need his introduction here because Matt used to run this business here, so he knows Illinois very well. And
how's that been so far?
Great. He's a godsend. I mean, he is really I think even Joe Lasardi would tell you, who was the first CEO of the company, that Matt has been just terrific for this company.
Can you give an example?
What's something that's really impressed you, like what you were before as a company as to what you are now?
I think that what happened, and I'm not critical of any of the previous, I mean, the last transition happened during COVID, so it was very complicated. We hired like 4,000 people during COVID.
Wow.
So, people didn't know each other.
Right.
So it was very difficult, and I think what Matt's done, Matt came on board in May. Matt's very personable. He's young. He understands the cannabis industry really well. He relates to the staff in the company. He brought in some very, very strong people right away that he's worked with in the past, and he's creating a culture. And I think the biggest thing that lacked at Curaleaf, when we started the company, we had very much of a startup culture. It was me, Lasardi, and like 10 people, and we were running around the country building the company. We had a great entrepreneurial culture. And then COVID happened. We hired 4,000 or 5,000 people. We became a big company all of a sudden, and that startup culture disappeared.
Right.
We became very bureaucratic.
Yes.
There was a lot of backstabbing. People didn't know each other, and so Matt has come in, and he's bringing us back down to that very entrepreneurial culture. He's building relationships with all the people, and I think that's really, really good. And hopefully it gives me a break to take some time off finally.
Good stuff. It's just the growth of the industry, right?
Listen, everybody talks about a slowdown and everything. I'm going to tell you something. Of course, we're cognizant, and I want to be conservative. But listen, we went public 4 years ago. We had $70 million of revenue.
Does this not feel like about 10 or 15?
October is going to be 4 years. We went public. We were at $70 million in revenue. In 4 years, we went to $1.5 billion in revenue. Okay, we've gone from 1 state to 23 states and 8 countries.
Think about that.
Just think about that explosive growth. And
we live in a world, though. What have you done for me lately, though?
Yeah,
it's just like, what do you do?
So I'm super excited about everything that's going on in the company. I think we have hugely interesting initiatives, and not only in my company. I'm excited for the sector. I really think the sector is maturing. I think the people that are working in it are A-listers now rather than B and C listers in the early days. It's getting accepted, not only in Washington, but also within the Wall Street community and other places. People are starting to focus on it and look at it. So, listen, I think it's still early stages, but I think the future is pretty interesting, and I'm very excited about it.
Well, one thing I did talk about with Rob Seacrest earlier this week when we were here in Chicago was that if you're looking as an investor to play in this industry based on regulatory, you need to kind of reset your expectations related to this industry. Do you agree with that? And if so, when you think long term, if there isn't safe banking that does pass, what's some of the feedback that you could give back to investors that are kind of looking at this? They seem frustrated because it's been kind of stale as far as, when are we going to see any kind of regulatory framework move? Should we be allocating our capital into other verticals? What is a message that you want to get through to people?
The main message I would like to take to people is that if you're a trader, this is the wrong business to be in. Okay. There's no liquidity. And it's and there's a lot of problems still in the market. It's the wrong exchange, low liquidity. But if you're an investor, if you think about things the way Warren Buffett does, or the way BlackRock thinks about things, or Fidelity, when I go talk to Fidelity and BlackRock, who invest in a lot of my businesses in the past, they don't ask you, what are you doing today? Or how was your last quarter? They ask you, what is this business going to look like in 3 years?
Right.
They're not interested at all in the last 2 quarters.
Pathway to revenue.
And the problem with this sector is because there's no large institutional capital, the sector is dominated now by second-tier investment banks and retail investors. And retail investors want to make money tomorrow.
Right.
And that is the wrong capital base for an industry that's just starting out. Think about the internet industry, right? Today we see all the FANGs, these giant multi-trillion-dollar corporations. But I remember when this all started in the 1990s, right? And I was one of the first investors in data centers. I built the largest data center business in Europe. And I can tell you right now that it doesn't happen overnight. No. It takes 10 to 15 to 20 years to have a sector develop into a large-scale business. So people have to look at that from that perspective. Pick the best companies, pick the companies that return, but make sure you're not only looking at the short-term gains. Everybody's like, what's their cash flow tomorrow going to be like? I'm saying, who gives a shit? You need to be investing now. You need to be building the infrastructure.
Right.
For me, from Curaleaf's perspective, I love the distress in the sector now because I can buy assets cheap. I can keep growing at a cheap price because we have a good balance sheet. And from that perspective, I'm super excited on the growth prospects over the next 2 or 3 years. And even if we don't get safe in November, we're going to continue to grow. And as the large investors start to look at the sector, that's what they want to see. They don't want to see what is your cash flow this quarter versus next quarter.
Right.
They want to see how is this business going to be, a $10 to $15 billion revenue business for Curaleaf, not a $1.5 billion revenue business for Curaleaf. That's what they want to see.
I'd be curious to see like just the different personality traits amongst retail investors today versus say back in the early 90s when you start getting going with these databases that you'd mentioned. But the world has changed a lot, to say the least.
But the world is, it's not only retail, to be honest. A lot of the hedge funds, everybody, it's a get rich thing, right? This country's gone such an explosive wealth generation.
But don't you think
in
the
the last
Canadian
15
cannabis
years.
run and the way the stocks ran 5-6 years ago, it's why people got so addicted to this industry?
Well, they got addicted to it, but they didn't look at the fundamentals.
Right.
Those companies never should have been trading at those valuations. I don't understand it. I mean, they should never have been trading at those valuations. That's just greed. An old mentor of mine, will remain nameless, one of the greatest investors in the world, told me once, he said, Boris, just remember one thing. He's still alive. He's in his 90s. He said, skinny pigs get fat, fat pigs get slaughtered.
Well said.
He goes, take your time, don't rush it, and you will build a great business. And that's what I've done over this, my fifth, multi-billion-dollar company I've built. And I am expecting, okay, if it doesn't happen this year, it'll happen over the next couple of years. But as long as I focus on building the fundamentals of the business and continuing to grow the business, then we'll do well.
Good stuff.
Eventually it'll happen.
By the way, your Giants ruined my parlay on Sunday.
What can we do about that?
What can we do? What can we do? Oh, well. But the Jets, were the Jets, were they not?
Don't do that to us.
I know.
We thought the Jets were going to be big this year. We really did.
Well, only 1 week, but it just seems like, same old thing in the Big Apple when it comes to the Jets. But man, I was surprised.
I'm hoping this is it for the Jets, and that they're done with this, and that they can change their approach to playing the game and start winning.
Yeah, good stuff. Listen, appreciate the time. Let's keep in touch.
It was great.
All right, thanks,
Thank
Boris.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. And if you like this video, wait until you see what we have next. Some of the best thought leaders in the verticals that we cover, from cannabis and psychedelics to cryptos and NFTs and sports wagering. So if you want to learn more, make sure to click on that bell for all notifications, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.